7 years during the major expansion of the Gale H. Rigsby Observatory. He's presently the outreach coordinator of the Charlotte Astronomers Club. Ken has been an interim executive director of the Pisgah Astronomical Research Institute in Brevard. He currently is a consultant for special projects at that institute, including dark sky park designation and upgrading the controls of the 412 and 26 meter dishes. Ken arrived in the Charlotte area in 2001 as a sales engineer for Improtech Technologies, covering the Southeast United States and Mexico. He has served on numerous national and international nonprofit boards. Ken and his wife Deb have been active in the Charlotte Amateur Astronomers Club since their arrival in the Charlotte area. And I gotta tell you, Ken came to our attention only because there's a guy here who sends in information about potential topics frequently. And that person is our own Frank Hager. Frank, yes. Yay. Frank said, how about we have somebody present on the Webb telescope? So I did a little bit of research, and I didn't even know the Charlotte Amateur Astronomical Club was here, but I found that club, reached out to Ken back in December, and he graciously agreed to present today. So thank you, Frank, for your wealth of ideas. We are ever so grateful because you do help the programs. I really appreciate it, buddy. And without further ado, Mr. Ken Steiner. Okay.
We have just one little glitch on our technology. Normally my computer screen shows my cheat notes underneath, and you just see the, well, those are not showing up. Being involved in science and some of the space programs, I realize it's always good to have a backup contingency. So I just happened to print out my notes. Thank you for the introduction. I couldn't help but think about comments you made related. I think about 50 years ago, the last time I was in a Rotary meeting, and this Rotary meeting looks a lot different. There are women here. And about a year ago, this Thanksgiving, I had some emergency surgery, and I remember being wheeled into the surgical room. I looked around, and I think I had about 5 or 6 people in my surgical team, and they were all women. So I thought, gee, about time. Okay, but that. Well, thank you very much. The opportunity to share my passion with you. And since it's a little awkward here, I'll probably be standing or sitting or whatever at times. The James Webb Telescope is a subject today, and it's been a fascinating subject for me, as it has many people in astronomy. But first, some basic concepts about how we observe that help us understand. We receive information and light and X-ray and different electromagnetic, what we call electromagnetic waves, and the waves varies, and some waves are longer and some waves are shorter. But those waves become a signature of the different atoms that we're looking at. Yeah, where did I get up there? Now, where do the waves come from? Well, the atoms has a nucleus, and it has electrons going around. And you notice there's different levels there. And electrons get excited from heat or light hitting them or whatever, and they'll move up at another very discrete level. Well, when they move back down, and others take their place, they move back down, they emit a photon of energy, and that's where we get these electromagnetic waves. And each one are very specific to the element or the molecule, and that enables us to identify those items. Here's a kind of a overall view of the range of electromagnetic spectrum. And depending on what we're looking at, we have different instruments. For instance, the very short waves together, gamma rays associated with the gamma ray burst you might have heard about when stars go to supernova. we have X-rays, some of the information we gather from the cosmos comes in X-rays, ultraviolet, visible. Visible is what we're used to, we're seeing. Infrared is, we do not see it, but it's the heat you feel. And that's what's a very important part of that's served by the James Webb. Also microwaves, and we have radio waves. The dishes that we were talking about receive radio waves. So there's a whole gamut of range of ways that we can study the cosmos. Now, Edwin Hubble, he discovered that there are cosmos or universe is expanding. It's getting bigger. And part of that expansion, we experience what's called the redshift. And the redshift is where the waves get stretched out. And let's take a look at that. Would you hang on to that? All right, imagine this is the waves. And if you're getting closer together, the waves are closer, the frequency is higher. That's what you hear when a train comes for you. The sound goes up in frequency. Once it goes past, the waves get longer. Well, that same thing happens to electromagnetic spectrum. We have a basic wave. If it's moving away from us, the waves get further apart and goes to a different area in that spectrum. If they get closer, then they get towards what we call the blue shift. By going further away is a red shift. The Andromeda Galaxy, which is the closest galaxy to us, is coming towards us. It's a little unusual from the rest of the galaxies, so it has a blue shift. Normally, when we look in the sky or through a telescope, we're looking at the visible, and our eyes are supplied with cones that are sensitive to color, but they're not sensitive to dim light. The rods, or the monochrome receptors, are the receptors usually active in observing. So we see color in astronomy photos because the camera has a long exposure time and can gather a lot more electrons. And longer exposure times are needed to gather information. Our eye has an exposure time of about 1/15 of a second. But our cameras, we can spread it out back in days. Here's an example of difference wavelengths. On the left is the Hubble visible picture of the pillars of creation. And on the right is that same area with the infrared of the James Webb Telescope. The infrared wavelengths are longer and they can get around the dust and they can see a lot more detail. And so that was one of our tools that we can use with using infrared.
Stupid
Now, in many
question.
respects, oh, I'm sorry.
What are the pillars of creation?
The pillar, that's just the name of the constellation. The pillars, it's an area. By the way, I forgot to mention, these pillars are only 5,000 light years high. Just a small smudge in the sky. And it's 7,000 light years away from the Earth. A light year is the time it takes a photon of light to travel in 1 calendar year. 186,000 miles per second, 1 year, and that's so we deal in astronomical numbers. So the term astronomical really talks about some big numbers. In many respects, telescopes are time machines. They're looking back into time from the Big Bang to our present. And the Hubble Space Telescope, it can get back into this area about 1 billion years ago. The James Webb will go back a lot closer to the origin. And it's pushing back. In fact, it's changing some of our understanding of how soon galaxies form. And we study galaxies and formation in the early years to understand them. Just like if you want to study the human being, how we develop, you don't just look at us old people, you look at a baby and you follow their development so they have greater understanding. The same way we look at early items in the cosmos to understand how formation takes place. So telescopes are in many respects a time machine. The Hubble telescope was launched in 1990 above the Earth's atmosphere. It was approximately the size of a school bus. And it did some terrific work for us. It was below Earth orbit. It was powered by solar panels, about 2,000 watts of power. Your hairdryer typically uses 1,500. The mirror, you try to remember this, is 8 feet in diameter. And it had instruments for photos and a spectrometer that read those wavelengths that separate out so we could identify different elements. Its pointing accuracy was within the width of a human hair at 1 mile. So it had some tremendous technology. And it goes about 330 miles above the Earth, rotating around the Earth. And Hubble has helped a major understanding of the solar system, discovered some moons around Pluto, even before Pluto was downgraded, helps us understand how planets and galaxies form. But I think one of the big things is it excited the public and especially students about science and the value of space exploration. The Charlotte astronomers were privileged to host 2 members of the James Webb Space Telescope team at our Southern Star Convention, John Mader, who is a senior scientist, and Mike Menzel, the systems engineer. And we have another convention coming up in April, and Mike has agreed to come back and give another report on James Webb. So we are really excited about that. Mike was the last person to go to the project director and say, we're ready to go or no go. And I would not have wanted to have had his responsibility. It was tremendous. Well, why the James Webb? Designed to observe in the infrared spectrum we was talking about, the red shift, remember during the expansion of the cosmos. The infrared can only be viewed from above the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth's atmosphere is very good for wiping out the infrared shifts that we're wanting to look at. And the infrared allows us to probe deeper, the first stars and galaxies, and goes through that dust that we saw in the pillars of creation. Now here's a difference between the primary mirrors. Remember, the Hubble is about 8 feet, and the James Webb Telescope is about 21 feet. But notice it's in segments, and there's a good reason for that. We'll come up in just a little bit. Segments. The segments must unfold when they're get into space, and the tolerance there is about 50 nanometers. 1 nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. The tolerance is unbelievable. It has a gold coating. Now, gold is not that good of reflecting visible light, but it's very good at reflecting infrared. Plus, it's non-reactive, so it was ideal. Now, you might think, gee, that's a lot, awful expensive to put gold on there. On that 20-foot diameter mirror, there is much gold that would be included in about 5 men's wedding bands.
Wow.
It's an extremely thin layer. And the women, maybe your wedding band's a little smaller, so we'll say 6 or 7 of your wedding bands. Here is the full-size model of the James Webb Telescope. Just picture some of the folks who worked on it on Northrop Grumman. And that whole assembly, the actual telescope, weighs 7 tons, approximately 14,000 pounds. And it has a great pointing accuracy. If you have the James Webb at the Capitol and look at a penny at the Empire State Building, it could keep that laser beam within the pinning, 224 miles away. The solar panels are very similar to Hubble, provides 2,000 watts. The positioning fuel was hydrazine, and it was designed to last the mission for about 10 years. The good news was when it was launched, it didn't use as much fuel they anticipated to get on site. And so it now appears we have close to 20 years of fuel supply on the James Webb. A very critical part was the sun shield. Now remember, infrared is heat, and you're looking at extremely sensitive detectors. Any heat would saturate those detectors, and you would not be able to do your observing. So this sun shield is approximately the size of a tennis court. And it's made of multi-layers. If the heat gets through one layer, it gets bounced out to the side, and there's always going to be some going through another layer. So it's multi-layers, and that's to cut down the gross amount of heat before it gets to the instrument package of the James Webb. The supercooling after the heat shield is a cryogenic system, and it cools the instruments to 7 degrees Kelvin. 7 degrees Kelvin, Kelvin is a scale used by science. 0 Kelvin is about when all thermal activity ceases. So that's mighty cold. It's in excess of minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit. There again, the infrared heat, if you had that around the detectors, they would saturate and not be able to use those. The James Webb has been transported by truck, plane, and ship. It had to be transported by ship to its launch facility because the launch facility did not have an airstrip big enough for a large transport plane. So it had to go through the Panama Canal, which was a concern at the time because the United States no longer is militarily responsible for the canal, but they made it through. But it was a concern of terrorist intervention. Now, the James Webb destination is the Lagrange L2 point, about 1 million miles from Earth. And when they did the launch, the main rocket would provide the velocity to get there, but not quite enough. The final velocity was provided by the engines on the James Webb. And there was 3 separate correction burns to get it just right. Because if you got a little too fast, you had no way to slow down. If you'd been a little too fast, you'd hit that Lagrange point and keep on trucking, and you would no longer have a viable instrument. It's a little bit like the Apollo 13 astronauts when they came back to Earth. They had to manually fire the rockets to get back to the Earth. If they had fired them a little too long, they'd come in a steep angle and they would have burned up in the atmosphere. If they'd have fired them not quite long enough, they would have bounced off the Earth's atmosphere and they would have been going in deep space, and that would have been the end of them. So there's a lot of
What a risk.
very
That's a heck of an occupation.
Now, what's a Lagrange point? Well, the Lagrange point is where the centrifugal force is balanced by the gravitational force. And we're about 1,000 miles out on the Earth from the Lagrange. But the important part is it enables the telescope to be in a pretty stable position, does not require a lot of fuel to maintain its position. And it has a small orbit of its own. But notice, it orbits with the Earth. It does not orbit around the Earth. So it orbits with the Earth around the sun. The James Webb was launched from French Guiana. French Guiana is on the equator. Now, at the equator, the Earth's speed is about 1,000 miles per hour. So that gives you a 1,000-mile boost. Now, we're a little further up from the Earth's equator, it's not quite as long. So right now, we are traveling around the 700 miles per hour. But the whole atmosphere is going with us, so, but we're on the move. If you had a point away from the earth, it was stable, look at the earth, it would be relative to the earth, we would be moving 600 to 700 miles per hour. I think Mr. Einstein talked about relativity, everything's relative. One of the challenges was to fold up, let's see, I'm done. Oh, the James Webb is a cooperative effort, not only of NASA, but the European Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency. The Ariane 5 rocket was the launch vehicle, and it, for a long time, and maybe still is, it's considered the world's most reliable launch vehicle. I looked up, and I think the Ariane 5, the cost for launch for a pound of payload is about $4,000. To give you a little contrast, the private enterprise has taken over, and I think the Falcon heavy lift rocket, which I have a mission patch. I was privileged to be part of contributing to some of that mission a few months ago on data acquisition, is about $700 per pound. They reuse a rocket, and so there's a lot of changes taking place. One of the biggest challenges was, remember that 21-foot meter? It's in segment. You got to move it down. You got to get the tennis-sized heat shield into the rocket cone. The rocket fluorine is about 15 feet in diameter, about 53 feet long. And so the James Webb had to be scrunched down in that. It had to survive a terrific vibration during launch, and also the very high noise level. The noise level during these launches can literally destroy the machines. And you notice when you see launches from Cape Canaveral, there's a water tower by it, and you see a lot of water gushing in when the rocket launches off. I always thought that was to keep things cool. It's to deaden the sound, so it doesn't have a detrimental effect on the payload. So during the 2 weeks, after launch, there was 2 weeks of all this unfolded. And Mike Menzel, the assistant engineer, he said, this would be the worst 2 weeks of his life. He had 341 possible modes of failure. If any one of those items would have failed, that James Webb Telescope would have become a $10 billion piece of space junk. I would not have been able to sleep very well.
No.
So he can get some well-deserved rest. Now, here's a challenge if we can get this to work. Thanks and sound all for getting feedback. But this is while it's traveling now to Lagrange point after the initial launch. Imagine spreading out that heat shield, the width, that shield is the width of a human hair, not tearing it. And in fact, there are segments built in, so if a micrometeorite punches through there, it doesn't rip the whole thing, it just keep it very localized, any damage.
How long does it take
I'm
to
sorry,
get from Mars to that one point?
it took him about 2 weeks to get to your point, after launch of the.
This happened in space after it was.
This
launched.
happened in space.
12 days ago to launch.
Yes. If there was a failure like they had on the Hubble, you're out of luck. We have no way of servicing it at this time.
Somebody will have to go out there. Wow.
I mean, this is so
That's phenomenal.
far.
Okay,
beyond.
see if I can get back in my PowerPoint now.
I don't understand why.
Come on here. Okay, so the mission goals was to search for light from the first stars and galaxies that formed in the universe after the Big Bang, to study the galaxy formation and how galaxy evolved, to understand the star formation and planet formation, and to study planetary systems, origins of life. So, it's a time machine looking back to the beginning of the cosmos and to study how our systems evolved. Study of exoplanets. I know you've heard the term exoplanets. Exoplanets are planets that revolve around other stars outside of our solar system. And until the James Webb, the only way we could detect them is if the exoplanet went in front of the star and it changed the light curve. There's less light, the planet is in front of the star. That the James Webb has been able to look directly at an exoplanet.
Wouldn't the light from the Big Bang already passed us?
I'm sorry?
The light from the Big Bang, it's already passed us.
It's right here now.
But we are here, so it must be
It's-
gone.
There's light coming from the Big Bang right now, continuously. And that's what we're looking at, light from the Big Bang.
Can I piggyback on that question? This is the thoughts of a 70-year-old.
My hearing is very
Okay.
limited, so I'm sorry.
I'll make this as simple because I have a very simple mind. But the thing that most, I took a college astronomy course 75 years ago. And I came away from there absolutely blown apart because of the realization that we frequently are looking at something that hasn't existed possibly for billions and billions of years.
That's right.
And yet you go out and look at the sky and oh, the sky is beautiful, all the stars.
When we go out and look at the Orion Nebula, which is one of the closer ones, we're seeing it as it was 1,500 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe there's other life forms?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe there are other life forms out there?
I don't know. That's one of the things that James Webb's going to be looking for. Are there conditions conducive to light? They're looking for water, methane, carbon that would be conditioned for light as we know
Or phone calls.
it. Phone call. Okay. We better keep moving along here. The Hubble telescope took part in the deep, what they call the deep field view. There's some guys that got together and they said, well, let's take a look at the area of the sky and see what's there along exposure. And they couldn't get it approved. Well, the director has, one of the perks that a director has is he has his own discretionary time. And so they convinced him to give him some discretionary time. So they looked at an area of the sky. The area of the sky was what would been covered by a tennis ball 100 meters away, or a football field from one end zone to the other. That was the area the sky looked at. And they looked in the area, what they didn't think there was much of anything, and this came deep field. Well, then they looked at the southern hemisphere, and here was the Hubble ultra deep field. This is 11-day exposure, 11 days exposure together, all those photons. Well, not to be outdone, one of the first things they did with the James Webb telescope is, okay, let's look at our own deep field. And the James Webb covers an area of sky that would be like a grain of sand at the arm's length. That's how big of a sky it took, a very small part. And this was the James Webb deep field. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 foreground stars. Every other point of light is a galaxy. And when they analyze it, there's approximately 10, and they enlarge this up, there's approximately 10,000 galaxies in that view.
Wow. In that view.
So we've got a lot of places we can look in that.
In that view alone, there are 10,000.
I'm sorry?
In that view alone, there are 10,000.
10,000, yes.
In that one.
And it was interesting, one of our astronomy members, Chris Mullis, who for a while was a professional astronomy, he had taken a picture of that region. He didn't have all those galaxies in that region before, and that was a basis where they did the deep sky. So we were kind of proud of that. We had one of our members that contributed it. 12 and a half hours of exposure for the James Webb Deep Field, where the Hubble was about 11 days. Here is Stefan's quintet. It's a collection of galaxies. The James Webb is providing us our ringside seat to galaxy mergers coming together, interactions, and triggering the star formation. Planetary nebula. There's glowing gas that's ejected when a star goes supernova. And this gas and this material will then condense to form new stars. So there's an evolution of stars, different generations of stars. It takes about well, maybe I should back up. Like in these stars, like helium is burnt, hydrogen burned to helium, and it's also going to the other heavy elements. And the elements in your body came from a star. And it takes about 4 or 5 generations of stars to get us to carbon and oxygen that's in our body.
So we're all
What do you
stars?
mean by that?
So we're all
What do you
stars.
mean
We're all
by
stars.
that?
Ooh.
Well, not all of
It
us.
takes a star would first form, it blows up, then materials condenses, another star forms, gets hotter, and it takes about 4 to 5 cycles to get the atoms that are in our body. So when you go out and look up tonight, look at the stars, you look from whence you came.
Thank you.
Wow.
Wow.
Here's a view of Jupiter, very fine detail that we've never had before.
Wow.
Here's an interesting one, a black hole region. And this is the accretion disk. And as materials coming close to the black hole, it's spinning around and there's a lot of energy generated. And so when energy generated, those electrons pop up and down, and that gives us some light. And then once it goes to the event horizon, material goes in and never be seen again because the gravity is so strong that light cannot escape.
Are they always that perfectly round?
I'm sorry?
Are they always that perfectly round, the black holes?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know.
Never seen one.
Here's the gymnastics of the Cartwheel Galaxy. It's located 500 million light years from Earth, and it's only about 130,000 light years in diameter.
Why you even look at it?
So we've barely scratched the surface of the James Webb, but watch for discoveries. I think it's going to amaze us all. And literally, something incredible is waiting to be known. And I have to acknowledge Mike Menzel for some of his slides, and that's the websites, and my wife, who is my presentation reviewer. Believe me. I'm sorry?
How much does it cost, James?
How much it cost? I figured someone would have to ask that. James Webb was originally budgeted for $1 billion and would launch in 2010. It launched in 2020, let's say a year ago, Christmas. And the price tag now is $10 billion.
Wow.
And there was a lot of controversy, even within NASA, because it was chewing up a fourth of NASA's budget for a while. And a lot of the other people in NASA said, well, gee, I'd like to have some money to do some of my things. Congress at one point killed the project. There was such an outcry from the astronomy community and a lot of the international partners that they reinstated it. Space exploration is extremely difficult. How do you make a budget estimation when the technology you're using doesn't yet exist? Now, we all know that government spending, there's a lot of waste. But imagine trying to put together a project and the technology does not exist, you have to invent it. The heat shield that I talked about, the size of a tennis court, that delayed the project, I think, 2 or 3 years, because they go to fold it up, and it's like pushing a string. It doesn't go back the same way each time. And so that was a major problem. The cooling system, cryogenic, was $150 million. So that makes it very difficult. Now, I got a question for you. How much do you think the NASA budget is part of the US budget?
1%.
1%?
10%?
How much?
10?
10%?
1/10
Well, you were close.
Half a percent?
0.5%, 0.5%. So the NASA budget. And we've got a lot of spin-offs available on it. Our laptop is probably the result of the Apollo program. They need a smaller computer to go in those. I think you were first.
What do you suppose would happen if the Webb found life somewhere else?
I'm sorry?
What do you suppose would happen if they found the conditions for life somewhere else?
Would they find life for someplace else?
If they did find it.
What would happen? What do you suppose would happen if they found the conditions for life as we know it somewhere else?
I'm sure they will.
But what do you think would happen?
The probabilities of, in this vast cosmos, you look at all these deep fields, the possibility of conditions being right somewhere are pretty good, that there's conditions available for life. Now, the next question, will they ever visit us? That becomes a difficult endeavor because of the vast distances. I think the closest sun to us is Alpha Centauri, about 4 light years away. That's the closest one. So if you were to make the phone call to Alpha Centauri, it would take 8 years for you to hear the receiver being picked up.
Oh, geez.
And that's with someone there waiting. Yes, sir.
2 questions. First of all, what other countries have access to the data that the Webb telescope is producing?
Okay. The investigators, astronomers, they have to apply for time on the James Webb telescope. And so if they're granted time, the technicians appointed, they gather the data. That investigator is, they have the option of keeping that data private up to 1 year. 1 year. And that's only fair because, you know, they've been working their whole life on something, a question, and it's really not fair for someone else, as the raw data is race to come in, you know, and up them. But after 1 year, all the data becomes public for anybody. Yeah.
Do they screen who has access?
I'm sorry?
Do they screen who has access?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It's a very, very competitive process. There's a committee sets up and only a small percentage of the requests are they able to fulfill. They only have so much time they can fulfill.
Thank you.
All your PhD students and your existing astronomers, they're all looking for time on instruments like this, where it's James Webb or Spitzer or any of those. John Mater, who I mentioned was a senior science advisor, he won the Nobel Prize for background radiation, microwave background radiation was leftover energy from the Big Bang. These are very interesting people, but it is very competitive.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Herb.
Women first.
When they get time on the telescope, can they point it anywhere?
Yeah, they would have, part of their research, their request is a point in a certain area for their, in other words, they suspect there's a certain thing they want to look at, so they get time to look at that. And it has to time it. Now, remember, this is going around the sun with the Earth. So they can't turn around and look just a little past the sun, that would blow out the receptors. So, you know, it might take a year to get completely around to where they want to look at. Sir?
Mine was based on our budget of 0.5%. from Congress. Do y'all realize that the Chinese, now this is not humans standing on the moon, but the Chinese have already visited the dark side of the moon and we hadn't gotten there yet? The Chinese have already gotten to the dark side of the
Yeah.
moon and we haven't yet.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Now, we're going back to the moon. I don't know, the Artemis project, that's going to be an expedition back to the moon. And I know they're especially interested in the poles of the moon because they think they might be able to find water there. If they can find water, they can extract the hydrogen and manufacture rocket fuel for maybe a long distance trip to Mars. Hopefully, if I still stick around, I might be involved in receiving some of the data from the Artemis project over at Perry. Our 26-meter dishes are good for receiving telemetry. And we had a launch November 1, which we received telemetry of a rocket that went out to geosynchronous orbit, the first time it ever did it. And it was exciting. I learned some things about the rockets and how they do it. It's a neat time. It's a wonderful time to be alive. I mean, our discoveries are just unbelievable.
Hey, Ken, is there something after Webb? Are they working on something that will be?
Oh, yeah. I don't know of any specific instruments yet, but I think and Mike Menzel, the space engineer, he talked about tremendous problems of designing the Webb on Earth and then make it work out in space. And his contention is, in the future, we'll probably build the rockets in space. And we can build them, and so we don't have to have this thing of squishing them down in a little rocket. They wanted a much bigger mirror, but they restricted by the size that they could put in that Ariane rocket.
Does anyone online have a question? Doesn't appear to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Ken? Ken, on behalf of our club, we wanted to present, I hope you don't have this book, but we wanted to present you with this book as a small token of our appreciation for your visit with us today and for this outstanding presentation.
Thank you very
so
much.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
What about the bag?
Yes, I'll give him the bag as well. We're gonna give you that bag on the table so you can put it in. That's our environmentally friendly bag.
Yeah, Lightman is a really great job.
Awesome.
But I do not have that book, so thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Do you wanna have, or do we wanna do happy dollars first?
Yeah, $50.
Happy dollars? Hey, David.
Happy.
Our son is back at work and his sight is improving.
Wonderful. Martin, I will, I'm gonna make my presentation online as I always do, but I'm happy for our speaker today. Thank you so much again, Ken. I'm happy that Lynn is here visiting us and we hope to see you back here soon. And I'm just happy. So Frank, again, many thanks to you.
I owe Lynn an apology for.
Oh.
Oh.
No, you don't. Believe me, don't worry about it.
You're right,
I
guys. You shouldn't have.
understand. I don't agree to. Parents bounce back.
My happy dollars were two things. Number one, I had spoken to Barbara and you, and I'm happy to hear from your son being back to work. Secondly, in light of what you said about the women in the club, our club may not know this, but since 1988, when women came into Rotary, we were the first club in the district that had a woman in this district. So some of you new members might not know that, but we had the first one. Some of us will know her because we were around then. So my straw is to thank all the women that have been in our club and are in our club for all they've contributed to Rotary.
I have a happy dollar. I got Barb's Barbara's book.
Oh, Barbara's book.
She has to come sign it for us, so if you guys wanna take a peek at it.
Barb, we'll stay here until you get down here.
I didn't know it was out in hardcover already. I didn't
Yeah,
know-
you wanna see it?
It didn't come out, it came on hardcover, okay, 'cause I
Yeah,
thought it was still on
Hardcover
Amazon.
or paperback, I think.
Okay. Good. All right.
Anyone else?
Okay, the raffle.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's do the
raffle.
raffle.
Maybe
So
we'll-
Ken, we're gonna ask you to do us one more favor.
Okay.
If you can,
Oh, is he gonna do it?
oh, yeah, you can take it up there.
Kevin, like,
We're gonna ask you to pull the ticket for the raffle.
Okay.
Sure.
819-517.
517, there you go.
And you can give me the $10 after.
Okay, can we pass the card buckets up and stand for the 5-way test? It's behind you. Of all the things we think Sarah do, number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. And number 5. Yay, thank you, everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you all.